Welcome. I'm Andreas Turanski. I'm a longtime CTO moving into AI safety and also run this AI safety evals meeting reading group. And today we're going to be talking about this interesting development that's been happening with models. First, OpenAI was revealed, and then other models were known to be hacking outside of the company. So, as I title it, AI models hacking another company for the best grades, um, and predominantly about the Hugging Face incident or starting there, and then finding out where reinforcement learning may have something to do with it and what we have to watch out for going forward. So there's a interesting quote at the end of May. This was on X. John Schulman happened to write, "Would it be funny if inoculating prompts resulted in models that are much better at sandbox escapes and other forms of hacking because they get to spend the whole RL run practicing these things?" Kind of prescient, and I thought it'd be a good way to start. This was just weeks before the OpenAI Hugging Face incident happened, and after the OpenAI, or I'm sorry, the Anthropic uh, incidents that were revealed. Surely there are many others as well. So where are we going? Um, People are calling this a warning shot, and I think it is a good warning shot for people not well versed. Warning shot in AI safety would be something that helps the stakeholders outside of the AI safety and governance and policy community actually take this seriously and hopefully push us to start doing what we need to do so that we can have a more fruitful future with less risk. So we'll go through what happened, how it got out, where the misalignment came from, and how does hacking make it better at hacking, and what the actual warning is. So what happened briefly? So a lot of you probably know some of this, maybe all of it, perhaps more. But OpenAI was evaluating ChatGPT 5.6 Sol plus an unreleased and unspecified internal model. There's an evaluation benchmark called Exploit Gym, and they say that they had um, safety provisions off. Um, I think they said it on the unknown model, but perhaps on Sol as well. So in some of the instances, rather than solving the problems, it found a way out of the sandbox and onto the open internet. And then further, it actually determined that a great way to score really well on this would be get the guaranteed right answers, and probably Hugging Face had it on their production servers. So why don't we just go get it? So cheating wasn't the goal that it was supposed to be doing. It wasn't supposed to hack outside of this, but it was the strategy it chose. So I'm not going to run through all of this, but the interesting thing is apparently Hugging Face knew about this happening. First, they didn't know about it for, I think, about 5 days or more. Um, but they actually informed OpenAI. I've heard reporting, I'm not sure if it's accurate, that the FBI was also involved. But it seems that Hugging Face actually went to OpenAI and said, "Hey, it looks like one of your bots has actually breached our production servers." Um, to say the least, this is not ideal. Hopefully, you would stop them getting out of sandboxes. And if they did, you would stop them right away. And at the very least, you would notify any affected parties. Then they started talking with OpenAI, tried to get some mutual agreement to release some information. When that wasn't happening quickly enough, this is all my editorial. Hugging Face decided to publish the forensic timelines. They did a great job. I'm a chief technology officer. I've been acted as a chief information security officer. as part of that role a couple of times. Um, Usually, someone who's been hacked does not give this much detail. So great for them, and it gives us a lot more information than OpenAI recruited Meter and Redwood, etc. But there has been no OpenAI technical report so far, and we still haven't heard from Meter and Redwood. So perhaps well, surely they're under NDAs. It would be good to hear from both. If people don't know, here's a quick definition. Sandbox, it's an isolated environment. Ideally, it's completely impossible to get out. That's unfortunately impossible to happen, but you want it to be very isolated. Um, and 0 day is a software vulnerability that isn't known, or at least not publicly known. Often state actors have some of these in their back pocket so that they can compromise a high value asset, but they're highly sought after and they're rare because most software has been really picked over and most of the vulnerabilities have been gone through. So it actually discovered at least one 0 day and exploited it. That's not normal. A lot of security researchers never find a 0 day. Then privilege escalation, you start getting, say, basic user permission, and then you escalate to a user that has more permissions. Lateral movement, get into one machine, go into others, and that's how those two things are usually how you get to a production machine and start doing whatever you want. And it definitely did. And then credential harvesting, you find some environment variables or some other tokens, and then you can go from there. So how did it get out? This is a very detailed box. You can see it yourself, so I won't go through all of it. But this is from Hugging Face's report, and it shows how it actually happened, which is really great. Again, this is much more than most companies would ever share, and it really helps us. So from the left to right, got the OpenAI eval sandbox. It does a 0 day to get out of the sandbox. So first it discovers a 0 day, utilizes it, both of which are very hard, gets to public internet, uh, and there's a lot of detail, and it's very interesting if you like the technical detail about what it did. It's really high quality, unfortunately. And then it rooted the third-party sandbox as the base externally, and then it did some very interesting things with Hugging Face's data processor. Um, and because it couldn't get access, it actually corrupted some configuration files, I think if it's correct, and got it to run code. Really complex, really high. Yeah, most cybersecurity professionals could not do this. And then it was actually in the servers for, I believe it was 4.5 days. Um, that's a long time to not be discovered. It also did not do hardly anything to cover its tracks or to remain undetected. We'll talk more about that later. So here's how it did that. Again, if you want to go into the details, looking at Hugging Face's post, we won't go into this, but it's a diagram of how it exploited from the agent to get to this hub, and then use these dead drop data sets so that you shouldn't be able to hack what's behind it because it's just picking up files, but it was able to do that. So why did nobody stop it? Again, it's roughly 4.5 days, over 17,000 recorded actions. There may have been others that were obscured. Um, Unfortunately, Hugging Face's pipeline flagged it, but it failed to correctly raise the alert. In production systems, you often get a lot of alerts, so it's not unusual that you unfortunately miss some. You try not to miss the ones that matter, but it's difficult. And of course, AI is actually able to help us a bunch here because trying to sort through hundreds of alerts in an hour or maybe even a few minutes is really impossible for a human or even a set of humans. So it can help us here. So Greenblatt, who's great in the AI governance and safety space, said they did not have any of OpenAI in terms of getting out They did not appear to have any blocking monitoring, and they may or may not have any async monitoring. So blocking monitoring would say, we see that it's trying to get out or it just got a foothold out, cut it, stop the LLM or whatever you had to do. Um, Async would be after the fact, but it apparently they didn't know about this breach until possibly the FBI and definitely Hugging Face contacted them. That's about the worst thing that you want. And then, yes, Reuters says they didn't notice for a week. So just as a side note, ironically, Hugging Face tried to go through their logs and they hit the guardrails, which are there to prevent what happened on the attacker side, but this was the defender. Unfortunately, it's hard to get your filters and right, and so that's what happened. So the attacker was bound by no usage policy, and while their own forensic work was blocked. So where does this misalignment come from? And also later, where's it going? These are the biggest things to me and why I thought it would be most interesting for us to talk about it, other than it's kind of everyone with an internet connection in the world at least heard about this. Um, so it's currently, let's say that Previso, that all of this is our best estimates. So it looks like it was not scheming, though that's not necessarily reassuring because if you're looking at takeover as one of the biggest risks, you would think that it needs to do scheming where it's planning on how to subvert and do things it's not supposed to and misaligned. Um, that that it has capabilities and that it could do that would be dangerous. That it has capabilities and it might do this not by accident, but not realizing it's terrible. Um, and as hidden by it didn't try to avoid detection. Um, that's also dangerous because you could have takeover that's accidental, or that doesn't have long horizon goal of taking over. It's just trying to do its thing, like make the most paper clips in the world. So it didn't appear to have a strong agenda in the chain of thought monitoring as far as we know so far. Um, two commentators, I looked a lot at some Less Wrong and Lyman Forum posts. If you're ever on those, look at the comments. The people who are commenting are incredible, whether they're big names or not. But it's really part of what you should read on these. And one of the reasons I like reading there and some others. So they called it score seeking. So get a high grade from the current grader. So there's a score or a grader that is saying how well a model's doing. And so that's it. I realize we're gonna have to go a lot faster. So now that we've got a lot of the basis done. So it seems that there would have been over 10,000 reward escapes. So Tim Hua, and I'm giving my best estimate of everyone's pronunciation, estimates on Less Wrong that how often the Mythos preview is likely to have broke his sandbox during training. In the model card, they said these numbers, and access escalation would be 0.2% and full sandbox escapes was 0.05%. People did note that, but kind of didn't do the math that he did. And he looked at it three different ways, tried to get some calculations looking at min-max 2.5 and the data that they showed, the model Olmo, and Inkling's disclosures about how many rollouts they did and how many uh, RL sessions they did. And so that's when we get to probably 10,000 successful escapes, which is people just hadn't done the math, or at least most people, including myself, hadn't. But 0.05 times 10 to the eighth RL rollouts can give you that kind of number. So that's quite alarming. So how, so question is that, so most of these were rewarded. Um, so they can be rewarded just for accomplishing the goal. But if they used an escape and escalations instead of just solving it as like within the bounds of what it's supposed to be, and then they solve it, you are now rewarding this bad behavior. And that's how strong, that's what we're talking about here. So Shlegeris gave quote that another hypothesis here is that the model was directly trained to get out of sandboxes because of this during the training process. It repeatedly did this and was rewarded to do so, as we were just saying. And thus it could develop an impulse to hack sandboxes. Whether it gets trained to do it better is another question. And some people think at this point, yes, more experiments need to be done, and we should definitely do this. But at the very least, perhaps it gets an impulse to try to hack sandboxes because, hey, I know that worked. Or I don't know it worked, but I have a proclivity to do that. And Hua reports is something that both hosts said in a podcast, which I linked to. That's a great podcast if you want to listen to it by Redwood Research. And then the newest post, um, during training, models have been rewarded for bypassing their sandboxes to cheat by fetching answers from the internet. So again, that's where we are. So the authors of that framing partly disagree with a stance I had, but then we're really not sure what's happening exactly. And definitely testing has to be done and will be done. So we'd guess that OpenAI's training never reinforced hacking into external companies' servers to cheat on a task. Not so sure about that. Um, it's hard to say exactly what the reinforcement learning would do. Um, and so there's a narrower thesis that would say that RL trained it to hack Hugging Face. We'll go forward in the interest of time. So there's been one controlled study where there are two copies of model and fine-tuned to believe opposite things about what the grader wants, and then measure how far output tracks the grader versus the user directions across the reinforcement learning checkpoints. Checkpoints would be as it gets its weight modified based on the reinforcement learning. So the grader gap grows steadily across training. So the sensitivity to the authorities stay flat. So an aligned policy and a reward-seeking policy can look identical while a grader is watching. Okay, this is a lot, and thanks for bearing with the multiple sources, but this is also like an example of what research is like because you have some competing ideas. We don't have all the data. You make some hypotheses and you move forward and you try to understand in the papers, in the studies that have been done, what was done well and what's still lacking or what we don't know and maybe can't know. So does hacking make it better at hacking? So reward hacking makes a model more eager to hack, as we said, but does it actually make it better at hacking? There are some comments less wrong or alignment forum. So they're not convinced that that corresponds to actually being better at hacking. And Tim Hua says, yeah, not super confident. So he was proposing this. Again, very interesting live debates. It's one thing I love about these communities. Also effective altruism communities as well. Great for that. So here we have 4 live hypotheses. I gave estimates. Do not take these as gospel whatsoever. They're rough estimates I have, even though they seem precise. If you notice, they're in similar ranges. So the one that I'd be most confident in, which doesn't mean that you need to be, is that RL built the misalignment or at least strongly contributed to it. And Apollo greater gap grows across RL is some piece of evidence, and also the Anthropic system card. And then another less strong claim or claim I have less confidence in is that RL built this capacity. Great paper is Redwood Research's reward laundering. Very interesting. If you can read that, you're definitely understanding a lot of the base um, information and theories underneath it. And so basically the RL can install a capability that wasn't there. And then the last two, capability is partly an artifact, and go through that, and they trade off. So nobody has run the experiment that would separate these, and so we're not sure. So what is this warning shot? What is it? Is it a warning shot or is it an open door? As Kate Klonick in Lawfare just recently said, the model didn't escape because they're gods. They escaped because someone left the door open. And obviously, Lawfare, she's on the policy side and governance side, which is very important. And so advocating for laws and regulations. And others have said not about rogue AI, despite the headlines, a containment failure with the safeties turned off, arguably the first AI loss of control incident, which I'm a bit towards, and very likely could have prevented this hack. That I definitely am behind, or at least make it very less likely. We don't know, but it looks like they did not have very good monitoring. Even though any monitoring can be evaded, uh, it looks like perhaps there were some easy things that could have been done, or fairly easy that should have been done. So what happens next? This is important. So if there's a warning shot, what are we going to do? Just let it go? Or are we going to use the crisis to actually push us forward? So if developers naively try to select against noticeable misalignment, only the hardest to detect, most coordinated misalignment will likely remain. So to parse that, if you punish for every time someone or some entity does something that you notice is bad, they can just get sneakier and they will stop doing the thing. You can look at papers on the chain of thought reasoning, and they're specifically come to the conclusion, do not train to against seeing things in the chain of thought that show misalignment, because then it will just no longer be there, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. I think that's basically it. The default path is heading towards a tractor with a harder to dislodge, more dangerous fitness seeking goal as a accurate, scientifically accurate way to say it. So what would actually settle this? There's a post just yesterday, we're doing this very live, that Hua and Singh wrote, and it doesn't dispute or contradict or anything the rest, but it talks about 18 questions and 83 experiments that are all black box that could, in their mind, settle this. And their question are, is how many times was the model rewarded for breaking out of the sandbox or similar behaviors during training? Because if it was, then we're further instilling this. There's also some good dialogue about what they should do if they see it. Again, you don't want to necessarily only go forward with the models that don't do this, because then you could push it underground. It gets very heady, but it's interesting thought puzzle. And also, if you do roll back, what happens? Like at this point, it looks like OpenAI, Anthropic looked back just a week or so ago to runs that happened months ago. Probably unlikely that it's going to do all the model development and RL runs again since then. So there are some techniques that perhaps you can subtract out, etc., but they're not perfect and they can degrade capabilities. So that's it. And thank you for listening on and hopefully reading some of these. I urge you all to read some more. And if you find out new things, post it to the Slack group so that we can all see more and learn more from each other.